Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of He Said, She Shed. My name's David.
I'm Renee.
And today we're going to get you guys caught up on everything that we've been working on here inside the He Said, She Shed. Welcome once again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have so much to get you guys caught up on because it's been weeks and weeks and weeks actually since our previous episode. So just a quick reminder of what our blank slate is. Here's a photo that I'm pretty sure we showed you in our previous episode. This is the beginnings. So that space over there towards the right, that will be the wood shop. The space over there to the left under the loft is the art studio. And we'll give you another glimpse at our 3D model for our visualization for where this is all headed. And then in just the next here a little while, we'll give you a sense of where we are along that path to this visualization. So the first order of business to get this construction zone up and running is to be able to see. It's dark in here. Yes, there are windows, but most of the time when we have opportunity to work out here, it's like after work and we lose daylight pretty quickly. So you can see one dinky little work light right there in the center of the frame, just bouncing light off the ceiling. But what's warming up off to the left is a 3-tube fluorescent light fixture. We bought a whole bunch of those reclaimed from a teardown of I forget which. But one by one, we're converting all these to run LED tubes, which is a simple thing that we'll be breaking down in another video. So major fast forward here, we've got a bunch of those light fixtures hung in the woodshop side, and I'll be breaking that down, the mounting process and some of the wiring process that went into this when we do the lights for the studio. That'll be in a future upcoming video, but just we're kind of doing the express version today, getting you guys all caught up. But just look at the light output. We were really ecstatic with the outcome of how much light that they put out. Obviously, we need to be able to see for the balance of the build out and the work in there for the construction zone of making this workspace a workspace. But gosh, once it's done, that's just going to be a joy.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this too, and you can see in the layout some are this way and some are that way. I know David, of course, has a plan for some of the pieces of equipment that are going to be underneath those lights. So I know you were strategic with where the lights were placed so that you'd have equipment directly underneath it. But how many lights did you put, or did we end up hanging in this 24 by 24 foot space? In the 24 by 24 foot space for the wood shop, there's a total of 9 fixtures, and the placement might look a little bit random as though there's going to be a specific thing under it, but it's actually a pretty even distribution. There's 3 in the foreground, and then 3 in the background, and then the other 2 are just kind of for fill to fill in the dead space. So they're as evenly spaced as I could accomplish, given that there's a post right up the very middle. Right. That one had to be offset. Yeah, but it's really neat though when you see this lit up that you were really thoughtful about not having shadowy spaces. So where one light ends, another one begins, and so you really don't see any shadowing here. So I thought that was very, very thoughtful placement.
I hope so. My only concern is, I do have a plan for a fair number of workstations like up against the walls out around the perimeter. And my only concern is that some of the placement of the lighting is too far away from the wall that I'll be standing in the light and casting a shadow for what I'm working on. That was something that struck me after we flipped the switch for the first time. But we'll just have to see how that pans out.
Okay.
So now that we can see what we're doing, we can actually start building here. The first thing we wanted to go after was some partition walls. So one of 5 stud walls you see assembled here on the floor, and we actually went with 2x6 material here. Now these are not load bearing. There's plenty of other stuff holding up the loft. These are just strictly for the purpose of dividing the wood shop, from the studio, and then from both of those spaces from the rest of the full height portion of the barn that we're here in now. But we went with 2x6 because we want to go uber where insulation is concerned. We want to run 6-inch insulation. So that was the reason for the choice of materials there.
Mm-hmm. In the middle of this photo, you're going to see that stack of insulation, and it's not the pink fluffy stuff that you usually see. This is rock wool, which comes in sheets of what? It's 6 inches deep by what?
4x8.
4x8. There you go. And so
I'm sorry. What did I say? 2x4.
2x4.
2 foot by 4 foot.
I don't know. 4x8, I think, is the sheets. But anyway,
yeah.
So we have but they're 6 inches deep, and so we've unpackaged them, and so that they have time to be able to expand. Because when they're packaged, they're shrink wrapped, and so we want to make sure that they are fully expanded before we put them in between the stud walls. And so what's great about the way that David constructed or engineered the stud walls is that they're exactly the width of this, and they're also with that 6-inch depth. They're going to fit in there very nicely. I will say also, you can see here, David mentioned that we bought the light fixtures. They were repurposed. Those doors that are sitting there are also from a place that we love to shop in Portland that has seconds or things that have scratches and dents from construction sites, or maybe overstock of things. So these 3 doors that you're seeing here were actually from that place, and then we just paid to have them hung. So excited about that. They do have some scratches, but with some paint, you won't even notice.
Nobody will know.
No.
They'll be awesome for our purposes.
I think so.
So there were 2 big jobs here back to back. We just talked about insulation for a moment, but before we could start sticking in all the insulation, we actually have to rough in a bunch of the electrical, because once you put the insulation there, it's everything's covered up for where you need to run wire. So this photo is just a quick look at one of 3 different entry points of where we have, well, for different circuits, be they lighting or outlets and so on. We've kind of divided things up a bit. Not everything here in the he said, she said space is all in one circuit. We've divided it up a bit. So yeah, so there's 3 different drops, 3 different entry points that allow us to have the cabling carry from this full height portion of the barn where we're sitting in. That's also where the sub panel is, to be able to get the cabling crossed over into this space beneath the loft.
So another thing that we wanted to do before we put in the insulation is, yes, this is a barn, right? And so we wanted to do as much as we could to rodent proof it. We have field mice. We built this place in the middle of their home. So we don't really want to share. They can have the rest of the area, but they just can't have our barn.
No.
So as you can see in this photo, the corrugated metal, what I did was I took clumps of steel wool and I tucked it down along the bottom to make sure that there weren't any areas for the little mice to come up through from the outside of the wall and then make their home in our cozy rock wool insulation. So before we closed it all up, went around and took care of that application. So fingers crossed that it works. So
yep, hopefully we're in a little bit better shape than had we done nothing.
Right.
When you go around the outside and you look at where the skin of the outer part of the building meets the ground, you'd think, well, there's no room there. Well, it doesn't take much. I don't know how they can get into places that they get in, but steel wool was, I forget where we ran across that tip for being able to deter them.
Yeah, a tedious task for sure, but well worth a couple of hours even. I don't even know if it took that long.
I don't know. You just took charge of that and ran with it, so I don't know how long it took you, but thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So with this photo, it's evident that we're gearing up for insulation, and we've got a few pieces of it stuffed into place. Now, insulation comes in 2 different standard widths, 16 inches and 24 inches, because that's the standard for like stud spacing when you're building a house, 16 inches on center or 24 inches on center. So we bought 24-inch wide insulation because for the most part, we knew that we could sort of make that work here in the barn as well. So you can see the stuff that's hung right now was really quick and easy because right out of the package, it fit where it needed to go. There's a bunch more that above and below what's already installed, that'll all need to be custom cut to size. But the good news is One of the cool things about rock wool, and one of the reasons that we chose it, is that it's really rigid. Usually when you think of like house insulation, you think of the pink fiberglass insulation that's got like a paper facing on one side of it. Well, it's really floppy. If you were to take a piece of that and like stand it up on edge on a concrete floor, it would just kind of like crumple. This stuff is rigid enough that if you stand it up on edge and then step away, hands off, it'll stand on its edge. So we were able to sort of wedge it into place just like you see it there, but there is actually about a 2-inch or maybe even more air gap between the insulation and the outer metal that the barn is skinned with. Mm-hmm. The reason that we did that is pole barns sweat, and we were concerned that the sort of more typical fiberglass insulation, if it would just kind of crumple and then rub up against the metal, that it would take on moisture. Well, again, the nifty thing about this being nice and rigid is it won't do that. So the barn can sweat and the evaporation will take place. The insulation won't get moldy to help along that dry out process. It just dries out by itself. And one little added bonus is that air gap has insulation properties of its own. So we kind of got 2 for 1 out of that whole system.
Yeah. You think about like a vacuum sealed, insulated mug or something. There's that air gap between them. That's kind of what the same thing it does. So it keeps the cool in or the heat in into the space and helps to moderate the temperature. So I think it's going to be great.
So here we've moved on to insulating those partition walls, the stud walls. The perimeter walls of the barn, those were kind of a puzzle and pretty fiddly, again, because we had to custom cut a lot of that insulation to size to fit into like non-standard places. The insulation that we bought is meant for like a home situation, and again, those standard stud spacings for like a standard stud wall. So, but now this was easy because we got 24 inches on center with the studs that we assembled. And so most of this just right out of the package could just get squished right into place. And that's all I have to say about that.
Let's do a quick walkthrough, a quick review of what we've done so far. So we're heading into the studio, and you can see along the wall are those yellow wires, and those are future outlet locations. And so lots of power, not knowing exactly what I'm going to put, so I want to make sure that there are lots of opportunities to plug things in. And as you see along here too, we got creative with our insulation. So most of the time it fit between the studs, but we had extra spaces where we might need to have those cut off ends to fill in the gaps, like to the right side of the door, for example.
Yep, no scrap left unused. We're trying to be really efficient and frugal with all of our materials here. So to the right, you can see I've got a little bit of a head start on sheathing the walls with OSB, because heck, I needed a place to hang the clock. Not to mention there's a few places where there's actual mounted outlets now, so we're using fewer and fewer drop cords, which is nice. It's nice. It's getting all civilized in here. But beyond that, what you're seeing is just more of the same that we saw in the studio. Insulation installed around the perimeter walls and all those electrical drops where future outlets will be. So I wanted to break down just a little bit about skinning the walls. We chose to put up OSB instead of sheetrock, mainly so that we could just screw anything into the walls and hang stuff anywhere we wanted to without having to fiddle with anchors. So the process, though, of hanging that OSB, I've never hung sheetrock before, but I've watched guys that just are amazing at cutting things down to size and scribing things into place so that everything all fits perfectly. And sure, you make up the difference with a little bit of mud and tape, but anyhow, those people are artists, in my opinion. So working with a vaguely similar task of doing what I did with OSB was definitely time-consuming. So with this photo, there's just one piece of OSB sort of hung in the middle of one of those bays. And what I mean by bays is this is a post frame construction building. There are poles holding up this barn, and those poles are 12 foot on center. That means from the center of one post to the center of of the next post is 12 feet. So that means the space in between from inner edge to inner edge is something less than 12 feet. So 4 by 8 sheets doesn't come out just nice and neat and tidy and even, that you can fit 3 full sheets in there. So I chose to start in the middle and then just custom trim the outer edge of the outer 2 panels. So with this photo, you can see the measuring tape on the floor, that the tape is butted up against the adjacent wall, and then we fall just shy of 4 feet. It's obvious that there's some of that has to be trimmed off. The really fiddly thing is this measurement down on the floor might be different up at the ceiling because these posts that hold up the building aren't like perfectly true and perfectly parallel. So trimming the outer edge of both of these panels isn't just a matter of running it through a table saw where it's a perfectly square cut. At least not for me, because I didn't want any gaps between where the OSB ended and then the post started. So we had to do what's called scribing them in, doing some funky unknown angle. So setting up for each and every one of these cuts meant that I had to measure down at the bottom, like you see in the photo, and then measure again up at the top, and then use like a straight edge clamp that I could run a circular saw against to make that angled cut. In this clip, I'm working on hanging more OSB between 2 of those posts, and I've got 2 out of the 3 sheets of OSB done. And I've taken a first whack at sizing down the 3rd and final panel to fit into place. And I'm just test fitting it right now. I know darn well there's a little bit more that needs to come off, but I'm nibbling this away a little bit at a time. It's easier to take a little bit more off if it's too big, but gosh, once you've already cut it too small, it's hard to put the sawdust back on, right? Measure twice, cut once. Right. Yay, team. So, I'm able to just eyeball at this point because I've done plenty of these by the time I shot this video clip. So just how much more needs to come off. So I'm going to walk this panel off camera where I'm set up with some sawhorses and my straight edge clamp and circular saw. I'll nibble off just a little bit more, and oh by golly, look, it fits. So at this point, it's just a matter of securing it to the wall with screws. Now, I need to know that these screws are actually going to go into solid material behind the piece of OSB. So I used a chalk line to be able to mark where the solid wood, the 2x6s behind it, actually were. So I'm putting in some temporary screws to be able to hook one end of the chalk line to, and then string that over to the chalk line that I had already done on the adjacent panel. Snap it, so now I know where my screws need to go. So I'll do that in all the places where there's solid material that I can take advantage of to secure the panel with. So now I'm just removing those temporary screws that I put in just briefly. I'll get this panel shoved in where it needs to go, and I've found that I like to start putting screws in up the middle of the panel first and then work my way outwards. And I want to say that's all there is to it, but I've got it down to a system now, but it's definitely not something that just went quickly or easily or without having to scratch my head and think about every little move. So that about brings you up to date with the condensed version of what's been going on these past several weeks. There is more sheathing to put up. We have more lighting to hang in the studio in particular. And then we've got a bunch of painting to do in there as well. So we're going to be bringing you along in these next several episodes where we're getting into the weeds with all those things. You can see we've got a little bit of a head start on painting right here next to me. And this is pretty promising for how this is going to look. We wanted to do this first before we put these particular pieces of OSB between the stairs and the stud wall. So that's why this is already painted, because otherwise we'd probably just goobered up the stairs, which are gray, with white paint. So we did get a little bit of a head start breaking out the paint, but there's plenty more to do, and we want you along with us for that. That's coming up soon.
Yeah, so thanks for coming along with us today. If you liked this video, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. We'd appreciate that too. Leave us some comments down below. And until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye, everybody.